And even, one of the classic examples is something like Spotify or Amazon, where they've got a lot of data on our behaviours. And the very experience you have when you use those products is very tailored to you.
Yeah.
You could be sat next to someone else using the same product, Amazon or Spotify, for example, and their phone or interface would look very different to yours. I've got to say that when I saw the graphic that comes with the article in the HBR, that's what drew my attention, because clearly they found out a way of quasi-scientifically correlating what they deem to be personalisation with the success of the company. So just exploring that a bit. The success measure they've used is compound annual growth rate, CAGR, so the percentage of growth over a period of 4 or 5 years. And then they come up with their own index to measure personalisation. And I don't know if you managed to get your head into that or not. It was a bit impenetrable for me, really, the way they've scored it in the article.
I haven't had a go at doing it, but I quite like the principle that there's actually a framework there to measure it. I think you probably need a reasonable amount of data to actually make it meaningful. But I think that principle of actually having a look at what data you've got and trying to classify it in different ways in terms of how much you know about a particular customer or contact, company, what kind of, how do you reach them, what triggers that, what do you know, all those sorts of things. I thought, well, that is actually an interesting way of breaking the problem down.
As a classic sort of big management consultancy approach, because they say you can do the self-assessment yourself in half an hour using their framework. But if you want to do the one that allows you to have robust enough numbers to compare yourself with everyone else, then you need to get them in for 2 weeks. So I thought, well, hats off, BCG. You found yourself a nice way of charging for that service. But nevertheless, the outcome has got this incredibly strong correlation. Now, of course, we haven't looked up the source data. We don't know how robust it all is. But essentially, they're saying that average companies have a score of about 49, 50 on their scale out of 100 of what personalisation means. But if you then map that to the growth rates, then the bottom decile of the growth rates have a personalisation score in the low 20s, and the upper decile of the growth rates, the sort of 10% a year sustained growth type companies, have got a score up in the 70s, low 70s on their particular scale. And they've broken it down into the 5 categories and stuff, which, as I say, I found a little bit impenetrable, but I'm sure if you went through their assessment, you get it. I don't think that really matters for the SME B2B sort of market that we're talking about, because you're not going to go through a BCG assessment anyway. The point is, have you got some elements of all this personalisation stuff nailed down? Are there gaps there that you could improve on? Given that at scale, it's shown the more personalisation you do, the more, certainly for bigger companies, they can grow.
And I think as well, you have this whole sort of almost iPhone philosophy sort of bleeds into every part of our lives, isn't it? So pre-iPhone design was kind of in business, but you had clip art and bits and pieces, and it wasn't always that way. But ever since we've all had iPhones and smartphones, our expectations of what looks good. So, for example, I think like Lean Startup. Have you ever read Lean Startup? Eric Ries, he talks about, well, just bash together an MVP, spend 5 cents on some ads, and you'll get some data. You can't really do that anymore because it's got to look good. It's got to have everything behind it, because all of our expectations of this have risen so high over the last decade or so. And I think in our personal lives, we are now subject to a lot of personalisation, whether we know it or not. And that will in turn bleed into how people think about decisions they make in business.
Well, I think it's the whether you know it or not is almost the kicker point here. Because if we are all experiencing it but without realising it, that goes to show how good it is. But with that behind that, you've got to think, well, we're not doing that as businesses, so our customers are missing out. And even, one of the classic examples is something like Spotify or Amazon, where they've got a lot of data on our behaviours. And the very experience you have when you use those products is very tailored to you. You could be sat next to someone else using the same product, Amazon or Spotify, for example, and their phone or interface would look very different to yours. And that's just the way it's designed. Even when you look at someone else's iPhone, it's been you've personalised it perhaps, but suggested by the phone. It's suggested an image to put on your wallpaper or something. So everyone's interface looks different, even though it's actually the same thing. But it's personalised for you.
And with the explosion of AI, we're starting to see a lot more of these tools be accessible to SMEs that perhaps wouldn't have been
Well, I think that's the
2 or
point
3 years
about
ago.
scaling it, isn't it? Because what I noted when we were starting to look at this is that the reason that we've become a bit unpersonalised is that when you're a small company, only 1 or 2 of you, you will probably be creating things by hand anyway. So you will be personalising by its very nature. And as you scale, you start to create templates and formats. And that's where, as you scale, things start looking a bit samey. And you get the insert your name here style of service.